Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony J. Algeman. Data is everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. Today, I'm joined by Peter Kazadoy. Peter is an Inc. 5000 serial entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, the author of Honest to Greatness, and a business coach who works with organizations and their leaders to help them overcome self-limiting bullshit and use honesty to achieve greatness. His articles on leadership and entrepreneurship have appeared in Forbes, Inc., Huffington Post, PR Daily, and more. Peter, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
So, Peter, we've got a lot to talk about today, and we were just talking before going on air to plan some of that. But why don't you just take a couple minutes, introduce some folks out there to folks who may not have seen you before. What's your story, and how did you start doing what you're doing today?
Sure. So my story is best summed up by red-headed male figure skater transitions to international entrepreneur. And although it sounds sort of smooth as I say it, trust me, there were a lot of bumps in the road and falling on my ass and so on and so forth. I started after training as a very serious figure skater for about 15 years. I was convinced I was going to go to the Olympics. Turns out the Olympics did not want me as badly as I wanted it. And after that, I sort of did a little drifting and soul searching, and out of college, started my first company with my business partner, which was a video production company. Had very little idea what we were doing, spent a couple of years bouncing along the bottom in poverty, making $800 television commercials for local car dealers, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds, Anthony. And through many pivots, we eventually got into the agency game, became a full service marketing agency, and eventually took that to the Inc. 5000 list for a couple of years in a row. And then I'll save the rest of my trials and tribulations for for the next chapter. But fast forward now, I've gotten pretty passionate about using brutal honesty to help organizations and leaders primarily get out of their own way and understand what it is that makes for successful outcomes in a world with near complete transparency.
I see. So how did you find this? I mean, I was going to make a joke, like the classic story of figure skater turned, honesty
We've heard it
guru.
1,000 times.
Yeah. Classic children's tale, right? And so,
Yeah.
how did you make that pivot? Was it what you were studying in undergrad, or how was it that you realized that this is your passion, what you were going to dedicate your career towards?
Yeah, in the spirit of vulnerability, Anthony, the first thing is I'm a pain in the ass. Nobody wants me to work for them. I always want to know why. I always think I can do it better. Mm-hmm. And figure skating is a solo sport. Once you go out and fall in front of 1,000 people on the cold, wet ice, wearing tights, nothing else is difficult. That is the pinnacle of difficulty. So, after that, to your point, I went to Brandeis, studied in all my elective courses I could possibly take. I ended up at the business school studying all these business courses. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed so orderly to me. I was like, oh, this makes sense. Revenues, profits, operations, spreadsheets. Yeah, I got this. I can do this. And I always knew I could do it better. So the twin double-edged sword of being an entrepreneur is it's great because you think you can do it better, and the downside is you think you can do it better, so you actually have to put your money where your mouth is and go and do it. So as I said, the longer story is I got out and I was working for my now business partner in his figure skating stores, and we came up with this brilliant idea that Dancing with the Stars had taken off, and we were like, well, figure skating's way more popular. It is by far the most watched Olympic sport. It always has been. So we were like, why don't we just go make a TV show about figure skating that'll help the overall business? Well, 2008 hit. That's exactly when I graduated, which is, a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, right? Graduate in the middle of an apocalypse. Yeah. And so that's sank us tens of thousands of dollars into debt making this pilot. And that's when we actually pivoted into video production using the resources that we had pulled together to make some money. That's basically how it started, and then grew from there.
Yeah, well, and it's nice to have that kind of transition between the thing that you've been doing for so long that you love to do and this profession that can be applied in a lot of different ways to folks that need it. And that's where figure skating has a limited market, even though it gets this every 4 years, it gets into this extreme focus. Mm-hmm. Its applicability to every other day is limited. But if you can take that video production component that you had and start to apply it for other clients, then things start to go, and you're able to grow upon that. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually an interesting journey to where you are now, because you're talking about this brutal honesty about this, how do leaders elevate themselves to a point where they can truly be trusted? Because I think trust right now in leadership circles is as prominent as potentially any topic we're talking about today. And so I know you've got a book coming out on this, and that's the Honest to Greatness book is launching in August, and we will definitely include a link to where you can order or pre-order that book in the show notes. So check out that. But because I've also written a book, and it is not something that I would call a fun experience in a lot of ways. Like, it is a brutally painful experience going through it. And there's an element, because you kind of touched on it about this, like, I think I can do this better than a lot of folks in a certain way, and you have to grab hold of that to motivate you to go and do this day in and day out, because it is a slog to get a book done. It is difficult, it is painful, and there's not, under most circumstances, a very likely payout in terms of financial rewards directly from it for almost anybody. And so you've really got to care. And so how did you realize that writing a book was that step that you needed to take? And what was that process like? Although I feel like I'm leading the witness a little bit on how I think about a book, but I want to hear your story about getting that done and now being at this precipice of launching it and getting it in people's hands, which will be an amazingly rewarding experience for you, I'm sure.
Well, I wish I had talked to you before I started, Anthony, because yes, what I've found is exactly what you've said. It has been a horrendously difficult, challenging process. And I asked for it. So, what happened was I had a very terrible tragedy happen to me, which is that I turned 30. I don't know if this has happened to you. Has this happened to you?
Oh, yes.
It was just, oh my God, 30. I don't know what it was about that age, but I just like cruised into 30 and I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what have I done with my life? Now, let me be clear. I mean, by that point I had built $1 million business. I just married my amazing wife. We were moving in and flipping a house. Like, for all intents and purposes, life was perfectly fine. But I just had this gigantic weight arrive on my shoulders that told me that there was a lot more that I had in me and that I needed to do. And one of those was writing a book. If you just ask me at my core, honestly, who am I? Author comes to mind. And as I do with my students who are entrepreneurs, it's like, when you deny those things and take yourself out of what I call honest alignment, it's just always going to nag at you. And I knew I didn't want that for myself. So turned 30, decided I'm going to write a book. Fine. I sat down, actually, Anthony, to write a marketing book. I never set out to write about, speak about, or frankly, even care about honesty. Like, this is all a surprise to me. And we'll get to why in a moment. I sat down to write a marketing book because I was fascinated over the course of our career. And, as a marketing agency, we've worked with local startups all the way up to Fortune 500s and even Warren Buffett himself. And I was fascinated by the leaders and organizations who took our growth strategies and just crushed it. I mean, they'd get like a 5-6 times ROI, stay with us for years, loved it. Other organizations that we'd give the same care and attention, same strategies, same, everything, they would just blow up on the launch pad. Could not get out of their own way, descended into infighting and politics. And it was just like, what in the world is happening? And I used to chalk it up to stupidity. Like, wow, this is a room full of dum-dums. Of course, they're not, right? That was my own stupidity. No executive who has risen through the ranks to become who they are is an idiot. But what I did find is perhaps even worse, which is that executives can rise to a level of dishonesty.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? Well, they get dishonest about what's going on in the world and how they need to adapt and change and communicate so they're not tone deaf. They need to get honest about the people around them, right? Who really has the answers in their organization? What are the frontline employees saying? What are the prospects saying? How are consumer trends shifting? And finally, honest with themselves, with their own biases and self-limiting beliefs as a leader. And I have seen many of them, Anthony, over the years. And so I got fascinated by this idea and couldn't quite put my finger on it until I had my own crisis of honesty at 30 and realized okay, this isn't just about business. This is about how to do anything in life, right? It has to start with honesty. Who am I really? What am I really trying to do? So I write this marketing book about communication, and I query a bunch of agents, many of whom got back to me and said, this is complete garbage and you'll never be a published author ever. And I got one, luckily, who signed me. And as soon as he signed me, he turned around and he was like, hey, by the way, this isn't a book about marketing. It's a book about like honesty in business, society, culture, leadership. And I was like, okay, thank you. But, you know, clearly I've hired a moron because you didn't even look at the cover page. This is clearly a marketing book. And of course, I went home and I'm flipping through it and I was like, okay, well, wrong again. He's exactly right. This has, yes, will this crush it for your marketing? Yes, but also your sales, your operations, your strategy, your finance, your culture, your people, everything. It permeates everything. It is the way forward. Why? Because we can't do anything unless we start from a place of brutal honesty. What's really going on? What do I really want? These very elementary decisions and self-talk that all leaders need to return to, unless they want to end up like, I give the example in my TED talk of Blockbuster and Netflix. The executives of Blockbuster sat around thinking, no, I think we can do things the same old way. People love paying late fees, don't they? Well, they were wrong. And the folks at Netflix have laughed all the way to the bank.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was sitting here just enraptured in your story because I so know that journey of starting out in a direction you think you're going to head in with a book and then realizing that what you needed to create was something else. And it in my own journey with my own book, I had started thinking about, okay, how could I add something to this world of data management that I was doing all of the speaking and consulting in, and it occurred to me that my place was in helping organizations realize the potential of their data systems, their data capabilities from a business context. And I felt that there was a missing link there in so much of what was out there. And that was what had motivated me. So it's interesting because you said, this is a marketing book, but what you ended up writing was something that was much bigger than that, much different. And really that's how you have to do it. Like you have to just go out and find your voice through that pain. But as it comes out, as you're able to reach new folks, I mean, it happens to me. My book's been out less than a year, and when people come up to me and say, Anthony, your book really helped me in something that I just couldn't put my finger on otherwise. It is the best feeling in the world. It makes all of that pain of getting it done worthwhile. And so
Sure.
you're not at that point yet, but you will be soon. But wait until you hit the 40 level. That one's going to be a lot more fun.
I don't know if I'll survive.
So yeah, that's but yeah, I feel like there's definitely some some similarities there. Well, let's talk a little bit about this notion of honesty and leadership, because I think that there's some good examples of where people have lost their way. And I think that we're seeing that today. I mean, we're recording this in the midst of the pandemic, and you see how different organizations have taken different approaches to what they're doing. And there's a lot of visibility. It seems like there's a lot of people right now that don't have a whole lot more to do than just read the news and comment about it on social media. And everything becomes very transparent very quickly, it seems right now. And so, as people listen to this or watch our interview today, what should they know about honesty and leadership? How do they, like most people I think they're relatively honest, but how do they gauge for themselves whether or not they're treating honesty as the correct ingredient in the correct way for what they're doing in their particular role?
Yeah, such a good question, Anthony. I actually just wrote my newsletter today about this very topic, which is, and this the savvy podcasters like yourself ask this question. It's like, well, everybody thinks they're honest naturally, right? No one walks around thinking, well, I did a good job being an absolute liar today. Like, that's not the way we operate, right? We make decisions and have thoughts around thinking that we're naturally right. What I profile in my book is that over and over again, the CEOs of Sprint and Quicken Loans and the Ritz-Carlton and Domino's Pizza and Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, they always have they have something very unique in common, which is three little words: I don't know. They operate from this place of ignorance is power, knowledge is bliss, not the other way around. And they're always in this state of, I have no idea. Now, this is not to say they're not confident. You can have no idea what to do, but still be confident that one is probably better than another, right? That's different. What this is a real admission that I really don't know because I'm not there, because I don't have that person's perspective. These are people who speak from the I instead of you. You know, you never hear them say you should do something because they don't know what you should do. They might share an experience relevant to them, say this is what I did. Maybe that'll help, maybe not. So it really is about this perspective of sitting back. And Anthony, we know this because if I gave you a dinner scene, right, and had you watch people around the table talking, and then at the end of the scene, I said, Anthony, which of these people is the wisest one? Invariably, you would look for the person who did not speak, who sat back and listened and observed. So, because we have this thing, we know in society that's the thing, right? So that's why I could, when I look through all the boardrooms that I've been a part of, I can tell you right off the bat whether the leader's a good leader or not. Because a great leader is like the person in the middle of a ping pong match. They're just passing the ball from one person to another. What do you think? What do you think of that? Is that true? How do we know? Is that true? How do we know? Where are you getting your data from? Back to data, right? How do we know it's valuable? What is it saying? If it weren't saying that, what would, great questions. Whereas the leaders in the organizations I've seen tank over and over again are the ones who are so busy talking, so busy in their internal dialogue that they're steamrolling right over the truth time and time again. So one of the best things folks out there can do in a leadership position, and by the way, everyone is in a leadership position, whether they're in an authority position or not, I want to make that distinction clear, is just to sit back, listen, and ask, is that true? And how do we know? How do I know? Just that perspective. And I have a whole chapter in my book around like managing from the middle, because I think that's actually the most difficult part, right? It's easy from a top down, to say like, all right, we're going to cut the bullshit. We're going to be more honest now. Here are the ways we're going to do that. And everyone will fall in line because that's their job. From the middle, it's very difficult. How do you get around a boss who's a gatekeeper instead of someone who empowers? And one of the ways to do it is to ask better questions. Be honest about other people around you. Be honest about what they're going through, particularly your boss. What are their priorities? What's their outlook? And so often we have this thing where we butt heads because we haven't taken the time to deeply understand where other people are coming from. And you look around at society today at all of the biases and inequalities and horrendous discrimination we have, we see that play out. The refusal for us to understand that we all want the same things as human beings, and we can actually get to common ground by asking really good open-ended questions and being open-minded. It just comes back, Anthony, to just being honest about I don't know, tell me.
Yeah, no, that's sage wisdom, and it's refreshing to hear it put that way, because it seems easy, or it seems like it's often forgotten in a lot of contexts these days, and I think that's very important for us all to remember. And I just think about the arc of my career, and I've got a few years on you, but having seen it from a consultant position, or from an executive position, or from the lower levels in an organization, and realizing that the more I've learned and the more I've done, and the bigger my reputation of being an expert has become, the more I realize I don't know. And that sounds so cliche, it's almost laughable, but it is so true. And it is absolutely, like you said, Peter, it's different than confidence. It's not a lack of confidence. It's realizing that you can see further. I like to think a lot about blinders. Like, we all have blinders, things that we can focus on in front of us, things that we are in our field of vision, and things that are just beyond that, are way beyond that. And you're always trying to widen that view. You're trying to get in more perspective and more understanding of things that you didn't previously have. And the more you see, the more you can make reasonable strategic choices to say, okay, this is the direction we probably should head. And that's while recognizing so little compared to what you would ideally have, and that genuine curiosity comes from that, and letting that drive you towards making those best decisions possible. And to, like what you said, is we're all leaders. We all should be doing these things regardless of whether or not we're in a position of authority right now. And I think that some of the most influential folks can often be with very limited authority, or no authority at all. I mean, as a consultant yourself, you come into an organization and you may have a loud megaphone, but you have no authority of making those changes. It's up to you to convince folks that your ideas, or to hear their ideas and say, here's where the best ideas lie. That's the role that you play. And so one of the things that I would like to talk to you about, and this, we're blasted through this the time that we have, and I want to make sure we get to some of these things. One of the things that you do professionally is help organizations manage their PR crises. So when things happen outside of their control, or maybe they have a data breach, or maybe they have something that comes up that all of a sudden they need to respond to. And this is something that, especially right now, it seems like it's all over the news, where people will have something that they've posted in social media in the past. One of their executives have posted there, or sports figures or celebrities or whomever has a social media post that they long forgot that has not aged well, and is being looked at through today's lens, and fairly or unfairly is a debate for another day, but it is certainly a PR crisis now. So I have a couple questions for you on this. One is, what do people do when that happens, or what is good advice when something like that happens? Like, this is the immediate thing to do. And then two, like, what, for those of us who haven't had that kind of problem happen, what should we be thinking about, or just do preventatively, to make sure that we're being honest with who we are now, who we were previously, how, things that we may have put on social media could be misread or misconstrued, or weren't intended for a wider audience that we may have never thought we were going to have. Now all of a sudden we do. So what are your thoughts on these things? I know there's a few questions I just threw at you.
So let's back up and understand how this type of thing happens in the first place, right? The world used to operate on the basis of information asymmetry. That's a fancy way of saying companies used to have information that consumers did not, right? They could have been polluting the environment in Nigeria and mistreating their workers in the Philippines. Nobody knows, right? Today, we have to assume that everyone knows. I mean, you look at the horrendous murder of George Floyd that happened a few weeks ago now. That was horrendous because, in part, we could all see it for our own eyes, right? That's why it had the reaction that it did, and with good reason. But if you think about that, if that had happened 50 years ago, maybe a handful of people would have known, and that's it. Now, fortunately, because we can see the video, there's audio, everyone around the world can know about it and now take action to prevent that, hopefully, from happening ever again. So if you look at the scandals that have occurred on the public side or private side, Wells Fargo fake account scandal, college admissions scandal, diesel Volkswagen emission scandal, right? I mean, like, all of these things, the truth is going to come out. Like those executive photos that they took in college when they were half drunk, like, we should probably assume they're all coming out, right? Here's the thing. Let's look at Domino's Pizza and what they did a little over 10 years ago now. In 2008, 2009, they realized they had a problem independent of the financial crisis. And that was that their customers were saying their pizza didn't taste very good. In fact, they even put their pizza in the boxes of their competitors, and the customer said, "Oh, yeah, I actually like that better. Same pizza." So that didn't just mean the pizza was bad. They had a brand problem too, right? They just had problems. And so what did Domino's do? Well, they got together and they said, we need to make changes, right? We need to improve our pizza. Now, they could have just done that, Anthony, and then put out an ad being like, hey, our pizza's better now. Come in and grab some. But they didn't. Instead, they put their CEO on national television to say, hey, everyone, turns out that our pizza sucks. I'm sorry. You deserve better than that. And we're going to fix it. Okay. And by the way, go to YouTube, because we've published all these videos of focus groups and customers saying that our pizza sucks. And we're going to keep having those until the opinion changes. Well, if you had taken stock of that honesty, Anthony, and said, damn, this is an organization that's brutally honest about where it's at, brutally honest about what they need to do, and transparent enough to show us that they're doing it, if you had bought their stock at that point, you would have had an over 3,000% return over the next 10 years. 3,000% would have made you a millionaire, okay? And all you had to do was see that they were willing to be honest. Now, let's talk about what Volkswagen did, right? When their diesel emissions scandal came out, right? They had falsified all these reports. Now, they could have done the same thing. What do they do? Nothing. Sorry, we'll do better next time. And we don't know, right? So now they're just left with this giant scar. Imagine if the executives had come out and said, well, it looks like we're a bunch of assholes. We're really sorry. We shouldn't have done that. But we did. People make mistakes, and obviously we're people with flaws. So here's what we're going to do now. We've got this entire process and plan. We want you to come in, tape our meetings, see how we're talking about this. We want to show you the changes we're making to our processes so that you know we are going to do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. And if you still don't trust us, that's okay. But we want you to know we're trying. Imagine if they had come out with something like that. It would have been like, oh, all right, well, hey, they did a bad thing. That was bad. But at least they're honest, right? We have that phrase in the English language for a reason, and that's why it works. It's all back to the interpersonal. Because the thing about social media is we can see into the windows of companies. We know what they're doing. We can go see what their employees are saying on glassdoor.com. There's no reason to hide anything. So in that situation, retreating to corporate speak or the ivory tower, it just doesn't work. It doesn't have any currency for us. Because if you and I, Anthony, got into something, what would we do? We get on a Zoom call and we'd have this conversation. Anthony, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I have no excuses, right? But I'm going to do better for you. Hey, here are the ways that I'm going to do that for you. And I hope we can rebuild trust again. Very simple, right? And if we as people and executives can come back to that interpersonal, if executives can come out and say, yeah, that photo leaked, that was a problem. Let me tell you about how stupid I was when I was 20 years old and this happened. And of course, the world was different, but that's no excuse. But more importantly, I was different. You have no reason to trust me on that, which is why I'm going to be much more transparent with you and who I am now. Give you access to me, whether that's through video interviews or whatever. That's the way forward. And it won't work for everyone every time because some people don't forgive. But the majority of people will say, at least you're honest, at least you're trying. And that can go a long way, a much farther way, by the way, than saying nothing at all, which is just not acceptable anymore in a world where you can access me on 50 different apps at any given time. There's just no excuse for not saying anything.
Yeah, well, and this is where this notion of honesty and this notion of transparency dovetails with what we talk about in data leadership, because it is all about transparency. It's all about it. And I often say data is the closest thing to truth we have in our organizations. This is about making things more transparent, making our own businesses more transparent to us is how we use a lot of the data in our organizations. But again, and I just, I'm glad you mentioned the George Floyd incident and murder, because the video is what makes it transparent for us. Yes. And it's highlighted that so much is not transparent despite an opportunity to be more transparent. And I think that was, and it's part, and probably not the main part, but part of the outrage is because how many times do we have to have something that's been brushed under the rug by somebody come out and become front and center and fully in view, and now all of a sudden action gets taken? That shouldn't wait for that, and we shouldn't allow things that can be more transparent to continue to hide. And I think that's true when we think in a macro context, when we think about police brutality and the videotaping and things like that. But it's also true in that micro capacity as individuals, as people working in our careers, and who we are as people in the end. And I think that to me this is a lesson that goes way beyond data leadership. This is a humanity aspect that I think is something that we should internalize for our own well-being as well as our organizational success. Like don't do that.
Totally, Anthony. I mean, that's what's made me so proud to write this book in a way that I didn't actually realize until this pandemic, until horrendous racial discrimination, has all come to light, because now I understand that this is a way forward for humanity, for society, as you were saying. Imagine a world in which we could all back up and adopt the I don't know, and in an open-ended, tell me what your experience on earth is like, because I want to learn. And to have honesty, be open-minded and willing to admit fault and ready to change and all of these things. Just imagine if we could breed a world of people who had this honest thought process. To your point, action takes place when transparency is had, right? When we can see it, we act. This is the secret, not only for organizations who want to create innovative cultures and dominate their competitors, which I tell over and over in my book and give plenty of examples, but also to lead your family life, to lead your personal life, to have a better marriage, to raise better kids. I mean, it really, this is a fundamental thing that I should not have to write a book about. You and I should not have to do a podcast about Be Honest, and honesty is the best policy. We learned this when we were 4 years old. And yet it just crushes me that the world doesn't function that way. And if I can help a couple people and companies and countries and, and kids get there, then, that'll be a job well done in my eyes.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I feel like the more, we think about transparency and honesty, and one thing I think about in data analysis. So I don't know how much data, deep data science or data analysis that you do personally, but there's this notion in like data warehousing of the single source of truth. And I think a lot about that being really dangerous, because I don't like the idea of a single source of truth. I don't want to cast one beam of light on something and call that a job done. Like, you do a lot of speaking, you've done a lot of theater type, event type things. To illuminate something, you need to shine light on it from a bunch of different directions. Totally. And that different kinds of direction, different perspectives, and through the collection of subjective viewpoints, which all viewpoints are inherently subjective, only through bringing all of those together can we get to real transparency, can we get to real truth. And I think that we cannot think of things in data or in terms of honesty or in terms of leadership as a black and white issue. It's not a binary construct. It is a much more shades of gray, much more nuanced type of understanding. And that is where it comes back to this willingness to say, I don't know. A lot of the decisions that leaders at any level have to deal with are nuanced, are confusing, aren't always clear, because there's a lot of different perspectives that you have to somehow filter in and then still manage to do something about, like take an action of some sort, because otherwise you'll just sit there and the world will happen to you or your organization. And that's not a recipe for success either.
I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, one of the biggest points I make right up front in the book is like, honesty is not just telling it like it is. It's not just blurting out whatever's on your mind. Like, that's one very small piece. In fact, that's rarely the way forward. Instead, it is this very nuanced, multiple perspective kind of thing. And I talk about perspective a lot in the book, and perspective taking and keeping, and how do you get all those minds working together versus in silos. But to your point about data, one of the best courses I took at Columbia Business School was the data analytics course. And I was struck not only by the number of ways we learned to manipulate data in order to provide, outcomes and insights, but also the number of ways that data get manipulated by people who are subjective, who have biases, we went over time after time, New York Times graph, corporate, 10K report, over and over and over again, ways that data can get manipulated and displayed to lead people astray. One of the biggest things I talk about is framing, as a method for being dishonest. And all through the pandemic, I was watching these news headlines like deaths soar to 1,000 today, and thinking to myself, if they had written a headline that was deaths still at 0.0001% of population, it would have been just as true without maybe some of the fear mongering and other, and I don't mean to say that the news should, make headlines that are this way or that way. What I do mean is I want everyone to be wise to how they are being persuaded, how, things like numbers can be manipulated to steal and divert their mind share. That's part of being honest too. In fact, in the honesty quiz on my website, I give you 21 questions, and many of them are, where do you get your news sources from? And how much do you dive behind these reports to actually understand the truth and what's going on? Because a lot of it is subjectivity leading subjectivity.
Oh yeah. And because you're in my world now, and that is something that is, it's crazy to me how just erroneous the conclusions can be made from data to prove a point, or how they can be selective in proving a point. What terrifies me even more are the people who have no idea that they're doing it, and it's rampant. And I think, to your point around the data analytics class, to me, one of my most influential classes that I took in my graduate school program was the marketing research class where I learned how to do things like conduct a focus group or write a survey. And it opened my eyes to just how badly they are done everywhere, and
Yep.
how slanted surveys can become from somebody who just wrote some questions sloppy. And that can get perpetuated by people who don't know better, that just pull in the results, and it's just snowballs. And so becoming a data analyst and using data proactively requires you to filter through so much nonsense, just like listening to people talk. Like
Yeah.
it's about the same level of trustability, and which is not a technical term, but it really is, something that can be highly inaccurate, despite the person who hands it to you thinking this is dead on right. It is a terrifying thing in all of those contexts. While we still have a couple minutes, I really want to talk just a little bit about, we're currently in this pandemic, like you mentioned, and this. I don't think I'm going to lead the witness on this one. I don't think the pandemic fundamentally changes what leaders should do or should be, or how they should approach challenges. But I imagine there may be some things that we need to do tactically to communicate more effectively, given that everybody's at social distance level or more, right? So what
Well,
are those
yeah.
things that the pandemic's impacted in terms of how leaders should interact, or be more honest in what they're doing?
I mean, one thing's for sure, this pandemic was a masterclass in how not to be a leader. I mean, if you look back to what we were going through in like March, beginning of April, it was pandemonium.
Yeah.
You had news outlets capitalizing on all these eyeballs, and it was just fear, fear, fear all the time. You had different politicians at the federal and state levels saying different things at different times with conflicting rules. I mean, it was a mess.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that, well, one, how do I pick just one, right? One of my biggest regrets for the leaders during that time is that there, even if there was a playbook, which I think I've heard there was, we didn't follow it, right? And so step one is like, what happened here? Like, why didn't we follow some sort of playbook? It's very difficult for people everywhere, myself included, to believe that we had thought about this in advance. And then when the time came, we were just like, who needs a playbook? Who needs process? I guess we just won't do that. That single failure creates a cascading effect of distrust. And once we lose people's trust, we can't possibly ask them to do anything and have them take a unified action. And in a case of a pandemic, the only thing that matters is trust and unified action. Otherwise, there's no stopping this thing. And so when you look at what's occurred now, right, you look at the death rates dropping. We're recording this end of June, right?
Mm-hmm.
Summer's coming, of course. Flu-like, epidemics always tamp down during the summer and warm months. So, unsurprisingly, we're okay, though now there are a lot of states rising. Part of the problem here is that there was so much pandemonium over the course of the spring, so much distrust created with so many alternative facts out there. Even if we saw drastically rising cases now, honestly, Anthony, I don't think the majority of people would listen. I think they're kind of done. They're like, no, enough with that. We weren't sure we were doing the right thing to be in lockdown to begin with. Now I still don't know, because people are saying conflicting things still. So, in a world where we don't know who to trust, we revert back to our own experiences. Well, in my experience, I don't know anyone who's died of COVID. And in my experience, I haven't gotten sick yet. So it must be fine, right? Now, obviously, that can be a wildly dangerous assumption to make. But I don't think we can blame individuals who make that assumption because of everything they've gone through. In fact, that was another really sad thing that I saw happen over the course of the spring and late spring, is that we were divided again, like this country needs more divisiveness over everyone who thought they should be wearing masks and social distancing, all these things. And then we see like images of people on the beach hanging out and going to pool parties in the Ozarks and all that. Mm-hmm. And it created this sort of vitriol between these two groups. And again, back to I don't know and open-ended questions. The wrong thing is, look at all those irresponsible people. I can't believe they're doing that. They must be stupid. It's like, no, they're not stupid. They just lived through a time where there was no leadership leading them in an organized fashion through what they needed to do and why. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is why we need you all to take these actions right now, and really carry them forward all together. In a world where we didn't have that kind of unification, it's not surprising that we have individuals taking an individualistic tact here and doing what they think is right for each individual person or household. So until we get, if you think about in terms of honesty, like all the things I just talked through, until we get honest about, how massive groups of people make decisions, and honest, with and about the people around us and their thought processes and how they follow leaders or don't, and then honest with ourselves about what we do know about those new news headlines and do know about, what's coming out of these pharma companies and from our president. And there's honesty and dishonesty on so many sides. It turned into an unfortunate mess, and it did not have to be this way, Anthony. It could have been very simple, very orderly, if we just had better leadership from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that those are some astute observations, and I think it is incumbent on all of us and our leadership roles, however they are, to try to do our best in any context. We may not be trying to coach, millions of people on what they should do during a pandemic, but we might be coaching 5, we might be coaching 50, and helping to create a place where, despite being absolutely willing to say we don't know, having the confidence to say, based on what we don't know, based on what we think we know, based on what we know, this is the direction we should head in, or we're going to head in, and we're going to do our best, and we're going to react to new information appropriately, and we're going to be clear about it, and we're going to be consistent about it, and when we do need to change direction, we're going to be clear about that too, and we're going to learn at this together, and we're going to do the best we can. And
well said. Where were you? You should have come on TV for it. That was good. Yeah, that's exactly what we needed.
So, but I think that, that's the best advice I think we can give ourselves at this point, is to say, okay, how do we want to do it better in our own sphere of influence, and try to own that for what we can. So we're about out of time today, Peter. This has been awesome. It's been great to hear your perspective on these things. And I know for me has given me a lot of ideas to think about as I'm running teams and taking them forward, and thinking about this strange time that we are definitely in. And sure I really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing that wisdom with everybody. I'm sure it's valuable to everyone who listened to this.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Come have an honest conversation with me at honest2greatness.com. That's honest2greatness.com. You can take the free honesty quiz, which in 21 questions will tell you how honest you really are, if you're brave enough to know. And book is out August 11th. Please buy a hardcover copy. I would love your support. And then you can tell me if you think it's great or you think it's bullshit.
Outstanding. Thank you, Peter. And thank you for watching or listening today. You'll find links and more information about today's topic in the show notes. Please remember to subscribe to our show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Visit Algman.com to learn more about Algman Data Leadership and the many ways we can help you become a data leader. Stay safe during these unusual times, and go make an impact.